Nice to
Sure.
be with all you guys virtually. This is kind of the way of the world right now, but I think things are getting better. I'm optimistic, and I think people do like getting together physically rather than virtually. And it's just kind of something that we've been dealing with last year. Something that's kind of wasn't expected. It's not our fault. Doesn't mean we can't still do what we do. We just got to do it differently. And it's kind of appropriate, I think, what I've done in the climbing world, going to the Himalaya and dealing with adversity and more or less expecting the unexpected. And how do you navigate those headwinds that kind of come your way. And so right now I'm going to share my screen. The title of my talk is No Shortcuts to the Top. It's kind of self-explanatory. But it's kind of what I've learned in the mountains, and I know there's many things in life where, you can't take a shortcut. You've got to earn it. You got to work for it. You got to train for it. And that's kind of what you got to do in the mountains. And I've been climbing now for 40 years, and I've learned a lot about how to prepare and plan and train for an event. When we go on these Himalayan expeditions, a lot of them last for 3 months just to climb one mountain. But prior to that expedition, there's 6 to 8 months of planning to get ready. And I think for me, my fear of failure is my motivator. I want to train physically. I want to put a team together. I have to raise the money. I do the logistics. And all those things are, the process that allows me to get ready, test myself on a mountain. And when you go on one of these Himalayan expeditions, it's never easy. It's not always fun. And people often ask me, why do I like what I do? And I've thought about it. And the reason I like it is because it's hard. And it has this kind of unpredictable outcome. Because as you climb higher on one of these mountains, 26 to 29,000 feet, it gets harder as you get closer to your goal. It gets steeper, it gets colder, it gets windier. And it's almost as if the mountain is trying to prevent you from succeeding. And that's kind of a cool thing. You're being tested. Are you patient? Are you persistent? Are you resilient? And more often than not, are you willing to be uncomfortable? Obviously, when everything works and you get to the summit, that's an amazing feeling. All that hard work, all that planning, all that investment pays off. And that's what you set out to do, to get to the top. And I've looked at my career and added it all up. And pretty much 2 out of 3 climbs I've been on, I was successful. And 1 out of 3, I wasn't. And that's more often than not because of conditions beyond my control. Bad weather, avalanches, rock fall, ice fall. There's so many objective dangers in the mountains that we have to accept them and we can't ignore them. And they do cause a lot of problems, the objective dangers. But in my opinion, the majority of risk in the mountains is not objective, it's subjective. It's the decision making, how people choose to do what they do and when they do it. And you can imagine there's a lot of very motivated people out there climbing mountains. They spend a lot of time and money to get to a mountain. And when faced with a decision about whether to go on or turn around in the face of risk, a lot of people throw caution to the wind and summit at all costs. And their ambition overcomes their common sense, and they don't know when to turn around, or they don't want to. And that, in fact, the decision making is what kills a lot of people in the mountains, more than the objective danger. And I've always felt, that, I like climbing, but I like being alive a lot more. And my attitude was always that climbing had to be a round trip. If I didn't get to the summit and had to turn around, then so be it. And after, a career of climbing, somebody suggested that I write a book and talk about all these events and what it meant to me. And again, in a nutshell, I wanted to convey the process, that there aren't any shortcuts to success. You've got to earn it. And in the mountains, we can't buy success. There's no elevator to the top. It's a day at a time and a step at a time process. And obviously the book did well, but a lot of people said I would have sold more books if I would have titled it Shortcuts to the Top. And it was actually a book that inspired me to climb. I read this book when I was in high school, and I was growing up in the great mountaineering state of Illinois at the time. And this was a book that was written in 1950. And it's a document of this event, a group of climbers that went to this mountain called Annapurna. A team of French climbers, 8 of them, went to Annapurna. And Annapurna is one of only 14 mountains in the world over 8,000 meters. Call them the 8,000ers. And 8,000 meters is roughly 26,000 feet. Everest is the highest at 29,000. And when the French went to Annapurna in 1950, none of the other 8,000 meter peaks had yet been climbed. And these mountains are all in the Himalaya. They're all in Pakistan, Tibet, or Nepal. And they thought, man, if we can pull this off, this would be an amazing achievement. And they did. They worked together as a team, 8 guys, for 3 months. In the end, 2 of them got to the top. And that's a success. That's how we look at success on these Himalayan expeditions. You don't always get everybody to the summit. You all work together and 1 or 2 people plant the flag, and that's a success for the team. And after reading that book, I was so inspired by the process and the journey and the teamwork and the adventure. I thought to myself, that's something that I feel like I want to do somewhere in my life, to go to Annapurna or maybe go to Everest. But this book kind of flipped a switch. And so I had this dream and I thought, wow, okay, I want to do that, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's going to take a long time. The training, the gaining experience, meeting the right people, a lot of steps I'd have to take. And I thought, well, maybe in 10 years, if I start right now, I'll be ready to go into the big leagues. And obviously I knew the first step I had to take was, to get the hell out of Illinois. So I moved from Illinois and I moved to Seattle. And the reason I moved to Seattle was I through all my reading, I discovered that it was kind of the hub of Himalayan climbers that started in the Pacific Northwest. Amazing mountains surround this city. We have the Cascades, and you can see from downtown here, Mount Rainier. It's only 2 hours away, and it's this mini Himalayan mountain. It's 14,400 feet. It gets battered by Pacific Northwest storms. And for me, I thought this would be the perfect classroom. I could do all of my training on this mountain and use those experiences as a stepping stone to go further and to climb higher. So that's kind of the reason I moved to Seattle, because of the environment. And I spent a lot of time climbing on Mount Rainier in the early days of my career. And I found people that were willing to take me to the mountains to teach me. They became my mentors, they became my teachers. And I learned, as an apprentice, just by going out there and doing and watching and listening and experiencing. And after 3 years of climbing on my own and gaining enough experience, I got a job as a climbing guide on Mount Rainier. And I worked there for 10 summers, day after day after day, taking people up the mountain. And in the end, I climbed to the summit 215 times. And I learned so many great things as a guide. Number one, how to be safe, how to make decisions, planning for the worst and hoping for the best. And we learned the essence of teamwork by roping together. We're connected physically with 3 or 4 or 5 other people as we're climbing this mountain. There's crevasses you can fall into. There's steep terrain where you can fall off of. And as a team, we safeguard ourselves and each other. But you can imagine if you're climbing for 12 to 15 to 16 hours roped together with 3 or 4 other people, it has to be a coordinated effort. You have to be in synchrony to make things work. And also, as guides, we're not only in charge of our own safety, but others that come to us, our clients. My number one goal as a guide is to keep my client alive. But they come to us, with very high expectations. They're buying a product. They're buying a summit ascent, hopefully, of Mount Rainier. But what we want to give them too is a safe event and also a good experience. No matter what happens, we want them to walk away with having a good experience. And, you know, sometimes we can go to the summit if the weather is good, if the clients are strong, but a lot of times we're not allowed to reach our goal. And there's a lot of events that occur that can prevent us from reaching our goal. High winds, bad weather, steep terrain, dangerous avalanche conditions, and all of those things we as a guide need to evaluate every single minute of the ascent. We watch our clients, we watch the mountain, and I call, you know, taking all that information in, listening to the mountain. Because there's all these indicators, there's all this information around us that literally helps us to make a decision. You know, is the risk too great? If it is, we turn around. But you've got to have that all figured out. And so for me, I think that listening to the mountain, you know, taking in information based on my experience, based on my instinct, and making the decision has kept me alive throughout the rest of my career. And that listening to the mountain was one of the biggest lessons I learned as a guide. And as a guide, I got to travel the world. I got to climb higher and higher peaks. I gained more experience. And eventually I thought, you know, maybe climbing Mount Everest was in my possibility. And I started to learn about the mountain and the history. You know, it's 29,000 feet high, only a third the amount of oxygen on the summit as there is at sea level. And it's on the border of Nepal and Tibet. And it was first climbed in 1953 by a British expedition. They had 40 people working together on that mountain for 3 months. And in the end, 2 of them got to the summit. Once again, that teamwork led to success. Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay reached the top for the first time. Second to that team effort, I think the use of supplemental oxygen was a huge benefit to their success. And I think because the first ascent of Everest was done with oxygen, it kind of became the standard or the norm. Even today, when you go to Everest, you use oxygen. It's a no-brainer. You're faster, you're warmer, you think more clearly, and you're stronger, you know, climbing to 29,000 feet. And for most people, you know, going to Everest is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They don't really care how they get to the summit. All they want to do is get to the summit, no matter how. And using oxygen helps these people because it brings the relative altitude of the mountain down by about 7,000 feet. So it brings it within grasp of most climbers. When I started to think about, you know, if I had the chance to go to Everest, it wasn't really important to me just get to the summit, but more important, how. And I thought to myself that the use of oxygen was kind of a contrived way of gaining success. You're bringing the mountain down to you. And I thought, I want to go try to climb 29,000 foot mountain. I'm not going to lower it to my standards. I want to elevate myself to its standards. And for that reason, I decided not to climb with bottled oxygen. I said, if I can't get to the summit without oxygen, I'm not going to get to the summit. And I think when I made that commitment, the decision caused me to train harder, to plan better, to focus more. And I had the willingness to suffer a little bit more for the sake of success. And I think I thought it would be way more rewarding. You know, I didn't know I could climb to 29,000 feet without oxygen, but that was going to be my test. So 10 years into my climbing career, I'd gained enough experience. I'd met enough people. I was invited in 1987 to go on an expedition to Mount Everest. This was a big deal for me. My very first trip to the Himalaya. And I was one of 8 people on this team. So it's not a very big team. And we knew we're going to have a lot of hard work ahead of us. And when you go to a mountain like Everest or K2 or one of these other big peaks, you know, you can't drive to base camp. You can't fly to base camp. You basically walk 8 to 10 days through the lower elevations of the country. We're in Nepal here, and you then finally arrive at base camp. And this is where you set up your operations. You're going to be here living out of this camp now, literally for the next 2.5 to 3 months. And you have to have brought all the supplies with you. Because, you know, if you forgot something, you can't run across the street to the store. So there's a lot of planning and logistics that goes into just getting yourself to base camp. From base camp now, we can't go all the way to the summit in one day. Base camp is at 18,000 feet. The summit is at 29,000 feet. And eventually what we have to do is set up camps, 4 camps that are higher than base camp within a day's climb of each other. And once those camps are established, 2.5 to 3 months from now, we'll then be allowed to climb through those established camps, and then hopefully on that 5th day, go to the summit. So most of the process of climbing one of these big mountains is us as a team carrying loads of equipment to establish those various camps. So right out of the gates, we have to work together. And if you're one of 8 people and if you're not doing your job, you know, it's a huge detriment to the team. And I promised myself and I promised everybody else, listen, I'm taking a spot on this expedition. I'm going to do my very, very best to contribute. And what that means right out of the gates, right out of base camp, you put on a pack. It's going to weigh 50 or 60 pounds. And then we start carrying this equipment up the mountain. For the first 8 or 10 days, all we're doing is going from base camp to camp 1, 2,000 feet higher, dropping that load of equipment, going back down, the next day putting on another load and carrying that to camp 1 over and over, day after day, until we finally have enough equipment established at camp 1. We set up the tents, we fill them with supplies, and then we have a couple of people occupy that camp, and then they start carrying loads to camp 2 and then to camp 3. And so basically we're sending up this supply chain of stuff in a very orderly fashion. You know, it's just like a military operation. You got to feed the front, right? You got to send food, you got to send supplies. So the people in the back are supporting the people in the middle that are supporting the people in the front. Very same process. And as we go up and down, higher and higher, over and over, back and forth, we're also allowing ourselves to acclimatize. We're building more red blood cells to work efficiently at altitude, but there's a limit. You know, by the time we get to 26,000 feet where we establish camp 4, we can barely carry 15 pounds instead of 50 pounds. So that supply chain starts to trickle and that pyramid of supply gets smaller. And in the end, camp 4, all we can do is get 1 tent up there with just enough supplies for 2 people. So that's how the logistics of this establishing camps occurs. So after all that time and energy and work, 2.5 months of that, we're now ready to hopefully climb to the summit. But knowing there's only enough supplies at camp 4 for 2 people, those are going to be the guys that are going to represent the team to go to the top. So how do you pick those guys? You know, we retreat to base camp, excuse me, we have a meeting, leader looks around the room and says, who wants to go to the top? And by then nobody raises their hand because, you know, you're tired, you've lost 15 pounds. That motivation that you had in the bar 6 months ago is gone. You know, you just want to go home. How do you pick the 2 guys? Well, based on their contribution, based on who's still strong enough and who's still motivated enough to do that final push to the top, the hardest day by far. So I was one of those 2 people selected, which was a great honor, but a huge responsibility too, right? That pressure of success is now on the shoulders of 2 of us. So we leave base camp, we climb through the first 4 camps, and on the morning of that 5th and final day, 26,000 feet, we've spent the night, and we get up and depart the tent at 1 o'clock in the morning, 30 below zero, turn on our headlamps. And the reason we start so early is we know from this camp, it's going to probably take us 12 hours just to get to the summit. and another 5 or 6 hours to get down. So that's an 18-hour round trip from that camp. So you've got to budget enough daylight and good weather to get down before it gets dark. So that's how you do the math and calculate your departure time. At this point, you know, we're so far removed from any of our partners down below. If something happens here, if we make a mistake, rescue is 2 or 3 days away. You know, you can't fly a helicopter this high. So every decision that you make up here has a consequence, either good or bad. And every decision that you make has something in front of it. You can't just be thinking in the moment. You got to be thinking about, if I do this now, what are the consequences 5, 6, 7, 8 hours from now? And that's how we think about all these things that we need to as we're climbing. 10 hours into that day, we finally get here within 300 feet of the summit. We're on that final ridge to the top of the world, and we can see the top. But at this point, things started to deteriorate. The weather got worse, the visibility decreased, the winds increased, and we felt that the risks of continuing were going off the charts. You know, we felt that no matter what, we could get to the summit. It was 2 hours away. We could get to the top, but we kind of figured out that with the conditions as bad as they would be then, we more than likely wouldn't survive the descent. So we decided to stop. There and then we stopped and turned around, faced with that decision. And that was literally the end of the expedition, you know, 300 feet from success. But we listened to the mountain. But imagine what a lot of other people do in this situation. And I've read about it, and I've heard about it, and I've seen it. People continue to go to the top. It's summiting at all costs. You know, they don't want to walk away from that investment of time and energy and money and expectation. You know, they want to be able to say they got to the top. And a lot of people keep pushing, and a lot of those people never return. You know, I ultimately knew that that mountain was going to be there for a long time. And part of the rules of engagement is if you don't succeed this year, you go down, you regroup, and you go back next year. So it's all about being patient. And then there's that attitude, well, you know, you went and you failed. I don't call an event like that a failure. If it's something beyond your control and you did your very, very best, it's not a failure. I call it a non-success. So I turn it into something more positive. So there's one strike against me on Everest. I went back the next year, tried again, and went to a different side of the mountain. This is the east face. We had horrendous avalanche conditions. There was no way to safely climb the mountain. So we left. So there's 2 expeditions to Everest where I had not succeeded yet. 2 strikes against me. From here on, I kind of went on an expedition every single year. From 1987, I went on a Himalayan expedition for the next 20 years. So the ball was kind of rolling for me. My third expedition was in 1989. I went to this mountain called Kanchenjunga, third highest peak in the world, 28,200 feet, and technically harder to climb than Everest. You know, we look at Everest as the highest, but it's not necessarily the hardest. This is 3,000 feet of ice that we had to climb on our way to the summit of Kanchenjunga. And after 2.5 months of climbing, 3 of us from the team eventually stood on its summit. Kind of one of the high points of my career at that moment, my very first summit of an 8,000 meter peak. And if it's early enough, you know, here we are at a little over 28,000 feet. If the weather's good, we can hang out for maybe about an hour, but no more than that. And from the summit, you get a great view. They're 80 miles to the west, just left of center, as you can see Everest. And to the left of Everest is Lhotse, and then that other pyramid to its left is Makalu. So we're looking at 3 of the other highest peaks in the world. So a lot of people think when you get to the summit, that's when you celebrate, right? Because you've achieved your goal. That's what you came to do. I've always felt that that was premature, because on the summit of a mountain, I've really only done half of what I set out to do. We still have to get down. You know, I've always had the attitude that getting to the summit is optional, getting down is mandatory. And many people lose sight of that. You know, they use all of their energy, all of their resources, all of their daylight, and in many cases, all of their oxygen supply just to get to the summit. And things tend to fall apart on the descent because of that. People are staggering, people are faulting, people are running out of daylight. And in fact, most accidents occur on the way down, not on the way up, because people haven't planned for it or prepared for it. You have to have budgeted for it. And I don't call a climb until I'm actually back at the bottom, taking off my boots. So the following year, my third opportunity to once again try to climb Mount Everest. This was 1990. We spent 2.5 months on the mountain carrying loads, establishing camps, acclimatizing, and finally in May of that year, I was once again allowed to try to go for the summit from high camp. On this particular day, I was alone. It's just the way the logistics of this climb worked out. And I was okay with that. I had the skills. I felt I could climb to the top without a rope partner. But the hard part was for 12 hours on the way up, you know, nobody to make a decision with, nobody to motivate with. And more importantly, if the snow is deep, who's going to help kick the steps in the snow? So it was a long, hard day, the hardest day of my life. And at these altitudes, you know, without oxygen, you're moving at a snail's pace. And literally for every step that I took, I stood there and breathed 15 times. And you take another step and you stand there and you breathe 15 times. And imagine doing that for 12 hours. You know, 8-10 hours into that day, you're like, why am I doing this? Because you're not having fun. Your body is screaming at you to stop. And you start to contemplate all the legitimate reasons for quitting. You know, you can quit and that's easy. And you can turn around and stop the pain. But, you know, if there's no legitimate reason to quit, you keep going. And that's what I did. I kept pushing. I stayed motivated hour after hour. Then I broke that day into smaller goals. Instead of thinking about how far I had to go to get to the summit, I found smaller goals. You know, I looked at a rock that was 100 feet away and I said, I'm going to climb to that rock. And once I get to there, I'm going to pick another goal and then another goal. So you break it into something more tangible. And eventually 12 hours into that day, I crested the final ridge and then I stood on the summit of Everest. And to be up there alone is pretty cool, literally looking down on every other mountain on Earth. There's nothing higher. And being up there alone is very rare and unique, but not so cool as I thought, who's going to take my picture? But I have an ice axe with me and I stick it in the snow vertically and I like a monopod and I balanced my camera on top of it, set the timer. And that's how I got my own selfie on the summit of Everest. And you have to remember, this was 1990. We didn't have iPhones. We didn't have digital cameras. Everything was still film. And it wasn't until a month and a half later that I was able to then develop the film and see that the selfie actually turned out. So high point of my life, climbing the highest point on Earth without oxygen. What do I do next? Well, I had other goals. And you know, even though Everest is the highest, we as climbers look at this mountain as more of our holy grail. This is a mountain called K2. Second highest peak in the world. It's only 600 feet lower than Everest. It's in Pakistan and very rarely successfully climbed. The terrain is very steep and technical. The weather is unpredictable. And a lot of people try to climb K2 and the majority of those people don't succeed on K2. In 1992, I felt ready to try to climb K2. And I went there with a friend from Seattle. This is Scott Fisher. We joined forces. We had no money. We had no good jobs. We printed T-shirts and sold T-shirts for money. We borrowed money. And in the end, we had just enough in debt to go to K2. And we joined forces then with a group of climbers And we basically then did battle with K2. This mountain is relentless. 45 degrees on average terrain. You might get a weather window of 2 or 3 days and then a 7-day storm. And that repeated itself all through the summer. It was a long climb. It was a hard climb. We had bad weather. We had avalanches. We had storms. We had rescues we were involved with. And I was not surprised because everything that I'd read about, I'd done my homework, everything I'd read about K2 and I knew could happen actually happened. So I wasn't blindsided. But there was a lot of people on my team that after 2.5 months of this battle, they kind of said, you know what, this is taking longer than I thought, and this is a lot harder than I thought. And they kind of gave up and started to go home. And a few of us said, well, that's kind of what we signed up for. We knew that this is what it was going to be. So a few of us stayed, and eventually Scott and I managed to climb further, higher up on the mountain, getting our first views of the summit, and eventually established Camp 4. This is at 26,000 feet. The terrain here is very steep. So you basically chop a little ledge into the slope and you park your tent on there. And to make things lighter, easier to carry, we make them smaller. And these tents weigh about 5 pounds, and they're barely big enough for 2 people, about the size of a single bed. So not made for comfort, more or less made for protection. And we're thinking from this camp now, we only have 2,000 feet of climbing to go to get to the summit. But as you can see, the higher you go on K2, the steeper it gets. I mean, this mountain is relentless. And that last day, there's no guarantee of success. So we go to bed that night thinking, tomorrow's our big day. This is a once in a lifetime event. Will we be strong enough? Did we train hard enough 6 months ago to have the endurance that we need tomorrow? Will the weather allow us to go? And so you don't sleep very much. You don't eat much at these altitudes. You have no appetite, but you have to stay hydrated. So we melt snow to make water, and we use little stoves to do that. The next day, we want to start climbing about 1 o'clock in the morning, and we woke up and a storm had come in during the night. 3 feet of snow had fallen. And literally every hour we had to climb out of that tent and shovel the snow off the tent to keep it from collapsing. So on that day, there was no way we could attempt the summit. It was still storming, it was still snowing. And my partner Scott and I started to think, what do we do? We're stuck here. We can't climb to the top. Maybe we should escape, go down to safety, go down to base camp. And, we kind of thought, if we go down now, we'll never make it back up. We're kind of running out of time and energy. So we decided to stay and wait in this little tiny tent. And we stayed and waited together for 3 days. And this is where you really have to like who you're with, right? If something bugs you about somebody at sea level, it's really going to bug you here at 26,000 feet. And you think you're just hanging out, and after 3 days, you're well rested. But no, you haven't eaten much. And in fact, your body is slowly deteriorating because of the lack of oxygen. So it is kind of a race against time. But our patience paid off. That window of opportunity came after 3 days of waiting, and we then were allowed to make our way to the summit of K2. And it's 10 hours from high camp to get to the top. It was a tough climb, and it really tested my resilience, and it really tested my patience. And it also gave me the understanding that you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. You can't complain about a situation you're in up there because you put yourself there. And I think all of those things put together allowed us to succeed on K2. And it's one of those mountains where you climb it once and you walk away, you don't ever bother going back. But it was a great experience. So I kind of now looked at my resume, and I saw at this point that I had climbed the 3 highest mountains in the world: Everest, K2, Kanchenjunga. What do I want to do next? And this had all been kind of random. And I thought I wanted a bigger plan, a larger long-term goal. And I then and there decided I wanted to go out and try to climb all 14 of these 8,000 meter peaks. Only three other people in the world had done it. And I thought, what an amazing project. I called it Endeavor 8,000. And I figured, I'd done 3 of them. There's only 11 left. And what I didn't want to do was give myself a time limit. I said, it's going to take as long as it takes. It might take 10 more years. It might take 15 more years. But this is this thing I'm going to go out and try to do. I had to learn how to raise the money. I had to go to sponsors that helped support me. And the number one thing I really had to focus on was, who was I going to do all these expeditions with? How was I going to create a team to go on these journeys with? And it would have been hard to keep a 5 or 6 or 8 man team together for 10 or 15 years. That would have been impossible. But I thought if I could find one person, a partner that was doing what I was doing, that was climbing without oxygen, we could do it together. Just 2 of us. Simplify, faster, more efficient. And the number one criteria I would have from that partner was that I had to like them. Because if I don't like you at sea level, I'm not going to like you at 26,000 feet. And also that skill set, we have to trust each other implicitly. If we're going to rope together and connect to each other with this rope, we have to trust each other. And I finally found that what I call the perfect partner, this guy in red, his name is Veikka Gustafsson. He's from Finland. We met in 1995. We climbed together. We liked each other. And then we became partners. And he and I then went for the next 10 years on multiple Himalayan expeditions together as a 2-man team. It was harder work, but it was kind of more fun. It was more interesting. And in my opinion, we had great success. For every 3 expeditions we went on, 2 of them were successful. And that's a good track record in the Himalaya. Typically, it's 1 out of 4, maybe. We're shooting 2 out of 3. Everything goes right. Nothing goes wrong. Safe and sound to the summit. And more importantly, safe and sound back home. And in my entire career, and I'm very proud about this, I've never had an accident, never got frostbite, never needed a rescue, and very important to me as well, never lost a climbing partner. It's very common in my world where you go with a team of climbers and something happens and there's an empty seat on the plane when you come home. And I never wanted to experience that loss. I was very proud about how safe I always tried to operate my expeditions. But 1 out of 3 of these trips, we couldn't get to the top because of conditions beyond our control. This is a mountain in Pakistan called Broad Peak. We spent 2.5 months on this thing. And on our way to the summit, we were forced to stop 100 feet from the top based on dangerous conditions. And I was now well into my career. I was doing this a lot. I was talking about it. I had sponsors. The media was following me. I had a fan base. And you can imagine with all those now external pressures that could change how you think about what you're doing. Are you still willing to turn around in the face of risk? Or are you going to change your rules and keep pushing? And I saw a lot of people in my peer group starting to change how they made their decisions based on external pressures. You're in this risky environment year after year, day after day. And in many ways, and in many occupations and in many other aspects of life, you become comfortable with the risk. And you've been following the rules, standard operating procedures, time after time. Nothing happens. And it's that one day you decide to step over the edge, to finish a task, to take a shortcut, to save some money, to accomplish a goal. And once you start stepping over that edge and become complacent, you might never be able to return. And I saw that happen a lot in my career. And I never wanted to step over the edge and be pushed by pressures that were external to my own goals. And I kept reminding myself, I'm doing this for me, and I'm not trying to please anybody else. And I remembered my foundation. And I think that's what kept me alive. And once again, it was all about patience. You know, if I couldn't climb Broad Peak on that first trip, I'd go back, and I did. 3 years later, I went back to Broad Peak and climbed that last 100 feet to the summit. So it's all about thinking about the future and going back. If it doesn't happen today, you go back tomorrow. And so I kept plugging along, kept climbing these peaks. Some days, some years successful, some years not successful. It was just part of the game. And eventually, after 17 years of being into this project, I did the math, and I had climbed 13 of these 14 mountains. And by 2004, I only had one peak left on my list. And this final mountain is Annapurna. And remember, this is this mountain that I read about as a kid that actually put me on this journey. And I hadn't really left it to be the last peak. I already tried Annapurna twice earlier in my career. Turns out this is the most dangerous of these Himalayan peaks, based on avalanches that shower down all of its faces unpredictably. Out of 180 people that had reached the summit, 60 had died trying. That's 1 out of 3. That's a huge statistic. And on my first 2 expeditions to Annapurna, I saw what this mountain was. I saw how dangerous it was. And I ran away twice, thinking, man, this mountain for me, based on risk, is off the charts. You know, don't die on Annapurna. That's not going to look good on the resume. And I started to think about the risk and almost convinced myself that I shouldn't go back to Annapurna for the 3rd try. It was too dangerous. I couldn't control the risk and be happy with what I'd done. You know, 13 out of the 14, that's a pretty good career. But then I started to think, I need to go back one more time and at least check it out again. Rather than making the decision at home, I wanted to go back to Nepal and be at the bottom of the mountain before I made the decision. And telling everybody, if we go back and conditions are just as bad as they probably will be, that I knew they could be, we would come home and I would know I made the right choice. But what if conditions are good? We have to be there to see if for some reason conditions might allow us to climb. And so that's how I planned this final trip. And I didn't make the decision lightly. You know, I'd been married at that point for 10 years. I had 2 kids at home to think about. But believe it or not, my wife believed in me. She trusted me. She let me do what I was doing. She knew how I planned. She knew how I trained. She knew how I made my decisions. And when you go on a trip like that, when you do something challenging and difficult and dangerous, and you've got a support crew at home, I mean, that helps you. That lightens your load. And I'm so thankful to have her watching my back as I go off on these expeditions. So here we go again. My buddy Vake and I, our 3rd trip to Annapurna. What's going to happen? We don't know. We're at base camp. We watch the mountain. We see what's happening. And that season in 2005, conditions were absolutely perfect. The mountain was colder. It was more glued together. There was no avalanche activity to speak of. So we said, man, we are at the right place at the right time. And off we went. And we climbed this mountain as fast as we could. And by then, you know, we were a well-oiled team. We helped each other, we motivated each other, we safeguarded each other, and we worked together on that mountain as a 2-man team. And eventually, on May 12th, we took those last 2 steps, and then we together sat on the summit of Annapurna. For me, this was literally a lifetime dream come true. This vision that I had, this 18-year project that I managed to pull off. More importantly, somehow to survive. You know, a lot of people try to think about talking about climbing these 14 peaks and they give up along the way. A lot of guys lose their lives along the way. And somehow I managed to pull it off. because I kept thinking, I remembered my foundation. I was doing this for me, and I was hopefully doing the risk assessment very, very well. And I walked away. So why was Annapurna, at the end? I didn't plan for it to be at the end, but I think ultimately it needed to be. It was my ultimate challenge as far as the climb. And I needed 30 years of experience to not only succeed, but survive. And so it came at the right place in my career. And then, poetically, this book that I read as a kid put me on this path. So my life now basically had come full circle because of this book. And I'll leave you guys now with the last sentence of this book. It's a great adventure story. Pictured on the cover here is the leader of the climb, Maurice Herzog. And he was one of the two people that reached the summit. He knew on the way to the summit that his toes were already freezing, and he was probably going to lose them to amputation once he came down. When he was on the summit, he's flying his flag on the top in the cold wind. He took his gloves off and he laid them in the snow, and he watched them slide into the abyss, and he didn't have a backup pair of gloves. And because of that, he froze his hands. And on the descent over the next 2 or 3 days, as they slid down all the fixed ropes they put in place, he shredded the tissue off of his fingers, eventually having all 10 toes and all 10 fingers amputated. And he had to be carried out from the mountain. They didn't have helicopter rescues in those days. So for days and days in the monsoon rains of Nepal, he was carried out in a basket. So he paid a huge price for the sake of success. He lost all 10 fingers and all 10 toes. But he says in his book, for him, it was worth it because the climb of Annapurna changed his life. That book that he wrote changed my life. And because of that, I did what I did. And also because of what he did on that mountain, I always now carry an extra pair of gloves. But it's the last sentence of the book, which I'll forever remember. He says, we all have our own Annapurna. And I think that's a great metaphor for life. The horizon of your careers are a series of mountains and valleys. Some years you achieve success. Obviously, you want to push yourself further every year. And some years you go backward. Some years you don't go anywhere. Last year is a great example of what we've all dealt with. But it's always about making that commitment, saying, this is what I'm doing. It's a day-by-day process. It's a step-by-step process. Some days I'm going to make strides in the positive. Some days I'll feel like I didn't get anywhere. And some days I'm going to go backwards. But that's the lumpy, bumpy road of life, right? You pick what you love, you do it, you make a commitment, you surround yourself with good partners, your teamwork, your coworkers, your leaders, your all the people that help you, support you, your family, your friends. That partnership is critical. And the patience and the planning and the persistence to do something challenging and safely. And I truly believe the number one ingredient to any success in any endeavor is passion. If you love what you do, it won't matter how hard it is. It won't matter how long it takes. Because it's all about enjoying the process. When we go climbing, it's not called summiting because 99% of the journey is the process. 1% is the summit. That's why we call it climbing. Again, passion is the key to success. And if you have that passion, you'll climb your own Annapurna as well.
Nice.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like it. Here, let me get the screen back.
There we go.
There we go. I appreciate that. And just a couple things based off of what you said. A few days ago, we had our senior leader of the Marine Corps come by and pay us a visit. And he's basically the most senior ranking Marine in the Marine Corps, 4-star general, senior advisor to the president on behalf of the service.
Wow.
And you echoed kind of some of the things he talked about taking some risks and taking some chances. and identifying some goals and working towards them. But in your own experience, and I'll ask you this question, in your own experience, you've seen people, and very famously in John Krakauer's book, you know, it talks about that day in, or those few days in Everest. And you've seen people make mistakes, and you've had to interject and basically save these people from themselves. So when you're faced in those situations, from your own experience, like any advice or any examples of how you handled where you're trying to convince someone that this is a bad idea,
Yeah.
and then they make the mistake, and then now you're the one who's having to rescue these people from the end.
Yeah, that's a really tough one. You know, we were all this 96 is a great example. There were 10 teams on the mountain. You know, every team had their own leadership. Everybody's kind of operating in their own environment, making decisions based on their team and all the pressures they might have felt. And you know, we were there doing a film, an IMAX film, and I was the leader of the climb. And not only did I have kind of the pressure of success for not only my team, but we had this huge investment by this production company to get the camera to the top, to bring back the footage so that they could make this film. So a lot of pressure on us. And we had always, though, as we were going up for our final summit push, you know, we were very adamant about being safe and, you know, what I call listening to the mountain. And even though other teams were also planning to go to the summit, you know, we call this group think or summit fever. There's that one day that's predicted to be good, and everybody, instead of waiting for other good days, they all go at the same time. And we were a day ahead of all these other teams, and decided, because of the weather, we were 2 days from the summit at that point. We said we need to wait for something better, and we decided to go down. And as we went down, we passed 3 other teams as they were going up. And you can imagine the thought process. Are they making the right decision? Are we making the right decision? Who's right? Who's wrong? You know, and all we could say to them was it didn't feel right for us. You know, we didn't know what the outcome was going to be for them. We couldn't tell them because of what we were doing. We couldn't tell them what to do. You know, you have separate teams doing separate things under separate leadership. You can't really tell them what to do. You just got to let them go. And we certainly wished them well. We hoped for their safe, successful climb and return. And in hindsight, you know, it all fell apart. It could have been a good day for them, but they broke a lot of rules on that way, on their way to the summit. They climbed too slowly. They climbed too long. They took people higher that should have been turned around. And the big mistakes that they were making were they were going to run out of oxygen. They were going to run out of energy, and they were already kind of on that edge. And then the storm that came pushed them over the edge. And that's why people died. And, you know, I've always felt that when somebody needs my help in the mountains, if it's a rescue that's necessary, you go do it, right? Climbing a mountain at that point is completely irrelevant. Saving somebody's life is way more important. And that's what we did on that trip. And I've done it before, and I did it afterwards. You know, if somebody needs your help, you go help them in spite of, you know, the mistake that they might have made.
Uh, Interesting comment, because the Marine Corps recently lost a bunch of Marines in a vehicle that sunk off the coast of California. I don't know if you heard, it's off the coast of San Diego near San Clemente Island.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the Marine Corps just recently released its report, and it's a really, if anyone were to read that, you couldn't help but feel that all the various mistakes that were made compounded to a disaster. And I'm sure we will learn our lesson. I'm confident we will, but you know, these things do happen, and in your own world, in your own experience, people die every year ascending, climbing mountains.
Yeah.
And I was really keenly interested in your assessment about 1/3 of the time to have 1 out of 3 climbs be successful is pretty good in some mountains, and especially Annapurna, which I got to see that mountain when we went to Nepal, um, very far away, of course, but I couldn't imagine making a climb up that. But when you deal with as a guide or alongside other guides, and you see people kind of making mistakes, how do you address these issues with them, or how do you address these challenges with them? What's your experience?
Yeah, if I'm running a group or leading a group or have people I'm working with, we try to keep an eye on each other. And the whole thing is you don't want to repeat mistakes that other people have made in the past. And I've seen it time and time again. People go, "Oh, that happened then. It's not going to happen to me." And then the same thing happens again, because high on a mountain, ambition. If you're guiding, you got clients with you that are paying a lot of money for you to get them to the top, and that's a good example of what happened in '96 as well. My friend Rob Hall was leading a trip. My friend Scott Fisher was leading a trip. They each had 8 clients with them, and each of these clients pays $50,000. So there's this huge amount of pressure. Your climbing decisions become business decisions. And that was a big part of the reason. And so we have to keep each other in check. And you can't become complacent. And I think something that I mentioned earlier is you can't make decisions based on the moment. Things are great right now. We're going to keep going. Don't worry about that cloud out there. I know the wind's kind of funky and the snow's not great, but we're going to keep going because we got to get to the top. Every decision has a consequence. And when I start climbing, and if I don't feel good about something, your instinct plays a big role in how you make your decisions. And even if 40 people are going in one way and I don't feel good about it, I'm going to at least raise my hand and say, let's have a discussion. And I think a good thing about a leader is to allow the people that they're leading an opportunity to voice their opinion, and to have them feel comfortable questioning a decision or questioning the leadership, at least to say, can we at least discuss this decision? I think that's good leadership. And I always do that with my teams. I say, if I'm doing something that doesn't look right or sound right or feel right, at least feel comfortable stopping and questioning that. We'll talk about it before we keep moving.
Thanks for that. Any other questions?
I do. Hey, sir, Major Crouch, the XO from Marine Attachment. I actually have 2 questions. I'll try to keep them short. You said when we first started this session, your fear of failure is your motivator, and it's your constant in your mind to keep going. And I try to put this in an analogy of the climbing world. What happens, and is that the same thing that keeps you going if you get to a false ridge, and then you realize I have somewhere else that I need to be? I thought this was it, but now I need to push farther.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of summits are multiple points on a ridge. And quite typically, we know that's going to occur. You can't really see a lot of that when you're climbing and you get to a point, you go, oh, I thought this was the summit, but there it is over there. And again, based on the time of day and all that, I always want to go to that very, very high point. I've been on a few climbs where I wasn't allowed to. I got to what's called a foresummit or a pre-summit. And a lot of climbers don't want to go that final distance to the final highest point because they say, oh, it's only 20 feet higher, but it's 300 yards away and it's good. I can go home and say that I climbed the mountain. For me, the highest point is the highest point. And if I didn't get it the first time, I'll go down, there's a be asterisks on my resume, and I'll make sure to go back and take the asterisks away. Cause for me, it's a personal thing. And that's how I plan on doing those climbs. And the reason I said, uh, my motivator is the fear of failure. That all had to do with the planning and the preparing and the training for a climb. Because if I had 6 months to get ready, I'm going to use every single day of that 6 months to get ready. Because if I do in the end fail and look back and say, oh, it's because I didn't do what I had the time to do, that's a big mistake. That's failure. So it was a good, and climbing mountains, having those goals out there are great motivators. I find a lot of people that want a goal in life. They want to go to the gym for a reason. I say, let's start climbing mountains, because you have this thing out there, and that's the reason that you're training. And that's the reason you have something to look forward to. And I think that's a great motivator for a lot of people.
Thank you. The other one I had is pretty short and sweet. Is your mentors and the people you looked at as leaders along the way. Did you ever express to them that they are your mentor, or did you just try to emulate and then go by their example?
My early mentors, I had there was 3 senior guides on Rainier that I said, these guys are, they have the attributes of a climber that I personally want to be, the qualities, the values. And so I took their best qualities and values and tried to incorporate into what I wanted to be. I worked very hard under their leadership. And they were, in fact, the guys that saw the qualities that I had as a teammate. And they're the ones that eventually invited me to go on my first big Himalayan expeditions. So, that apprenticeship kind of thing worked out. I have thanked them. When I write my books, I do thank them verbally in the books as well. I say, these were the guys that took me under their wings and took me into the mountains. And in fact, my very first Himalayan expedition to Mount Everest, I was invited to go by one of my mentors. And I remember him inviting me, and I said, listen, this is a big jump for me. I've been to 20,000 feet. I've never been to 29,000 feet. And you're inviting me to Everest? And he said, if you don't get the opportunity, you'll never get the experience. And I thought that was a great message. Somebody that allowed me to go on a trip like this to gain experience. And I was one of the 2 then that pushed to the summit in the end of that climb. So it all worked out very well.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. I have a question for you. My name is Tyler Ammon. I'm the supply officer and logistics officer here. So I'm glad you mentioned your children, because I have 2 young boys. So I feel like resiliency's always kind of been a trait that's been admired from a distance. And even today, more so, I feel like it's being chipped away at, and the value is still there, but not a lot of people value it. So how did you foster that in your kids and identify whether they were taking to it or not?
I think I did it more than anything just under the radar. I think they watched me. They saw what I did. They saw how I did it. And man, they are on their own very resilient. And I think where we live, we're outside all the time. We go camping, we go hiking. They know how to carry a pack. And I think from me, they've learned that, if I choose to go do something that's hard and I've chosen to do it, there's no complaining. And there's a little bit of pushing that you need to do when kids are younger, right? They say, oh, I don't want to go do that. That's going to be too hard. I don't want to. You got to push them a little bit. You don't want them to hate whatever you're trying to get them to do. But if you push them a little bit and they understand that, wow, the results of me doing something like this are really satisfying, I think that helps their self-esteem. And when my kids were young, we never really talked about the risk and the danger of climbing. We underplayed it a lot. And it's funny, only recently my daughter and my son, who are in college for the very first time, read my book. And they go, we didn't know you did all of that. You know, we kept it just on the down low because we didn't want them to say, oh, here's my dad, famous mountain climber. You know, I was just dad climbing mountains.
Nice.
I know you're short on time, and I appreciate everything you've devoted some time out of your day to speak with us. And unfortunately, due to COVID, you know, we talked previously. I'd love to get you out here, and I think we can in the future.
Yeah.
But I do have one last question for you, and I've always been entranced by those who attempt Everest and decide to climb it. But do you think Andrew Irvine and George Mallory made it to the top?
You know, it's quite possible, but I still think it's irrelevant because they didn't make it down, you know, and they are still in search of the camera. You know, they found Mallory's body in 1999, but they're looking for Irvine, his partner, thinking that he might actually have a camera that might have film that they can still actually develop. And I mean, it would change the world history of climbing if they saw, oh, there's Mallory on the summit of Everest. But you can't take anything away from Hillary and Norgay because they're the first guys that got to the top, and they're the first guys that got back down from the top, you know. And that is, for me, the biggest point. You know, when we sent man to the moon, you know, President Kennedy said, we have to get him to the moon and return him safely. Otherwise, what's the point? So, I mean, it'd be an interesting thing to find out, but again, I think it's completely irrelevant.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll leave it at that unless anyone has any questions. But, sir, I appreciate it. Thank you for your time, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah. No, it's my pleasure. Thank you, guys. Hope you're good.